Let's go ahead and create the main screen of our temperature converter app. It's going to look a little something like this once you're done. You can, of course, customize this however you like, but I'm going to show you a few fundamental things like how to create text fields to enter numbers, how to create buttons, and finally labels, and then position them all. We've kind of covered a little bit of this, but I want to introduce you slowly to storyboards and design so you get a good fundamental understanding of it, as you are going to spend most of your time in this section. So open up Xcode Beta and follow along. So with Xcode Beta open, let's create a new Xcode project. And this is going to be, of course, a single view application, just like the last one. Hit next, and let's call this something obvious like temperature converter. Save it wherever you want to save it in the next screen, and let Xcode create that for you. Go ahead and open up your main storyboard. And in here, we're going to create the really simple graphical interface that's going to be part of our app. So I'm going to select an iPhone SE and zoom out a little. Right, so if we have some kind of application where we're converting things, we first, of course, need an input. And that input comes in the form of what's called a text field, which is down here in the object selector. And it tells us that this displays a rounded rectangle that can contain editable text. And whenever a user taps that field, the keyboard appears. So a text field does a lot of the keyboard showing and text entry for us. So we can click and drag that over. Let's drop it in somewhere there. And let's also, before we edit that, give our view, which is the one I've selected here, a background. And I think I'll make it a nice gaudy sort of color. Let's have a nice orange or something like that. Something that will show up white very well. Right, so we have this text view. Now we also need probably a button to actually start off the conversion process. So let's go to our object inspector and start typing button. Click and drag one over. And then I'm going to select that button. I'm going to change its font a little bit to a custom one. Perhaps this Helvetica is quite good with bold. And then I'm going to crank up that font size. And you don't necessarily have to do this. You can do it however you like. It's completely up to you. I'm going to change, of course, the text displayed on this button to something plainly obvious, like convert. And if I just drag this out in the storyboard a bit, you'll see that it displays nicely for us. Then we need a field that shows us the result of this conversion. So this is a field that we don't want to enter text into. We just want to display text. So a UI label is actually perfect for that, because the keyboard doesn't show, and it generally doesn't have click events, although you can make it have click events if you wish. And I'm going to change that color to white. I'm going to change my system font. Let's have a custom one, and we can have this as an even bigger font. And if I click and drag, this expands out nicely. Now I want to put that text in the center of this. So over in the right-hand side, I can click the center icon for the labels properties. Incidentally, all of these properties are up here inside of the attributes inspector. Now, what do we need to do? We need to actually constrain these somehow, because at the moment, all three of these items are free floating. So they'll just end up where we've left them here in an absolute position, no matter what device we run on, which is bad. So we need to tell iOS where to put these relative to one another or to other elements on the screen. And we can do that a couple of ways. We can actually use something called a stack layout, which is this mysterious button down here, the first one in of the four. Now I know in the previous modules or module, we actually used some of these align, the pins, and then auto layout stuff. So for this module, I'm actually going to continue down the lines of alignment and pinning, because stack layouts are a new thing that were introduced in iOS 9, but a lot of people still kind of use aligning and pinning, and it's good to understand the alignment and pinning before we start to dive into stack layouts, because it gives you a good fundamental understanding. So let's position this text field. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to position this horizontally and vertically in its container. And then I'm going to give it a fixed width. And because we're entering a number, this width can be something relatively small, perhaps 160. So now this is positioned in a relative position in our container. And we can tell that from these orange lines that appear. I want to shift this up a little, so I'm going to select this vertical center, and I'm going to double click it, and I'm going to give this, I think, a negative value of perhaps, let's try 80. And that shifts it upwards for us. So now if I click my little triangle icon and update my frames, it tells us what the position will be. If I select a different device, like an iPad, and it shows us where that will be relative to the iPad. And notice the other items without constraints, the other two labels and buttons, are actually in the same absolute position. So let's go ahead and change those. So I'm just going to zoom in a little, and I'm going to make this button relative to the text field above it. So I'd actually like this button to be in the center horizontally, so I'm going to select it, and I'm going to add my horizontal center, so it knows where it is in terms of the horizontal part. Now I need to position it relative to the button above. So what I can do, instead of doing Control, click, and drag, and then choosing vertical spacing like we have previously, what I can do is select it, and I can select this icon that's second from the right, and I can give it a spacing to its nearest neighbor. So to the neighbor above it, perhaps let's give it about 20 spacing. And make sure that you press Enter, and that will actually apply it. So now if I update my frames, it positions it correctly. And the great thing about this is, if I select this text field, and I go ahead and move this vertical constraint, so let's say I put minus 120, and then I update my frames again. Whoops, you have to select the view controller to do that. It'll move the button up with it in a kind of relative manner. Okay, now I want to position the label in the same way. So again, I can position that horizontally, and then I can give it a spacing to its nearest neighbor, perhaps of 20. Hit Enter, and that will apply it. We can update everything, and we're good to go. And if you double click the label, I'm actually going to call this result. I don't know why my caps lock is on. Result. There we go. And that will hold the result. And perhaps I'm going to put a ... to imply the result will be here when the user clicks Convert. Now I just noticed something. This Convert button isn't quite right. Because even though it says convert, convert to what? We don't actually know. So let's put it explicitly. Convert to F for Fahrenheit. Alright, that is pretty much our display setup. In the next lecture, we're going to look again at how to connect all of these graphical elements to our code using outlets and actions. This is good practice. I know you've done it before, but it's one of the more common things you're going to do. So it's good that we're going over and over it again and doing it in the recommended way that Apple say to do it. So stay tuned for the next one.